The state of California is currently facing the worst drought in 1,200 years. And as a consequence of such extreme weather conditions, water in key reservoirs is dropping to dangerously low levels, which is forcing the shutdown of major hydroelectric power plants and leaving the state in the dark amid one of the hottest summers ever recorded. The relentless drought and extreme heat, both worsened by climate change, are critically straining California's already taxed electric grid and pushing the water supply at Northern California's Lake Oroville to deplete rapidly. Early last month, the water level in Lake Oroville, the state's second largest reservoir, was so low that hundreds of houseboats were hauled out because there wasn't enough water to hold them. Today, however, state officials revealed the water level in the lake is even lower. In fact, water is at such alarming levels that the Edward Hyatt power plant is being forced to close for the first time since it opened in 1967, according to California Energy Commission spokesperson Lindsey Buckley. Typically, when the power plant is operating at full capacity, the lake's water is pumped through underground facilities to generate electricity that can power up to 800,000 homes. This means that now all of these homes are at risk of facing severe power outages throughout the whole summer. The announcement of the shutdown came after California Governor Gavin Newsom declared a statewide heat wave emergency, with record high temperatures and higher electricity use adding more pressure to the grid. Amid a major heat wave that is stressing energy grids in states across the western United States, Governor Gavin Newsom today signed an emergency proclamation to free up additional energy capacity, Newsom's office said in a press release. The governor's declaration underscored extreme peril to the safety of residents due to the heat wave and suspended permitting requirements to allow the immediate use of backup power generators to help alleviate stress on the state's energy grid. On top of that, California energy grid officials are urging residents to reduce power consumption, particularly during the evenings when electricity demand is at its peak. If consumers don't reduce their electricity use during the peak time of the day, the state's grid might experience widespread power outages and suffer from damaged power lines. In essence, this situation highlights this is gonna be a long, hot summer of higher electricity bills, periodic rationing, and blackouts for millions of households and businesses. Needless to say, those increased energy costs will also add to the inflationary pressures plaguing the United States economy. To make matters even worse, Lake Oroville isn't the only one with dwindling water levels. A similar situation is occurring at the Hoover Dam, which forms Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the entire country, and produces enough electricity for about 8 million Americans. Now, the worsening drought is resulting in record low water levels and seriously compromising the efficiency of hydropower generation at Hoover Dam, as water is used to spin turbines to produce electricity. According to the latest data released, energy capacity at the dam has already fallen by roughly 25%. Since turbines can only operate and generate power as long as the water level stays above 950 feet, and water levels have significantly dropped in recent days, less water also means less pressure and less electricity generated to send out to the grid. Therefore, the hydroelectric plant is also expected to operate at reduced levels this season, despite the elevated power demands during the typical summer peak. In short, Californians are not only facing the devastating effects of extreme heat, but also the combination of a critical water crisis and a disastrous energy crisis that's adding chaos to what should be a joyful summer. One tourist named Hugo Cuevas, who recently visited the area, was just shocked to see how low the water levels were at the dam. He said, 6 years ago when we were here, I recall that the water was a lot higher. we're actually very surprised how low it's gotten, how shallow it looks. With the entire West recording scorching temperatures and catastrophic heat waves, experts are worried that California's stressed power system will be irreversibly pushed to the brink way before the summer is over. For that reason, in addition to calling out for power-saving measures, state officials have been asking California residents to also reduce their water consumption as much as possible during the hot summer months. They're even requesting consumers to take shorter showers, to fix leaks at home, plant drought-tolerant trees, and reduce watering home landscapes. But some officials have taken more draconian approaches and declared a water shortage emergency, also issuing mandatory water restrictions that are punishable by fines in case consumers do not comply. The state's Water Resources Department said water is a precious and limited resource, especially in drought-prone California, where the next dry period could be right around the corner. As a result, water conservation and the efficient use of California's water supply are major priorities. Meanwhile, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, a nonprofit regulatory agency that works to prevent power failures in the U.S. electrical grid, exposed that despite the official preventative measures, California remains at a high risk of energy emergencies. Many experts have been arguing that the state's shift to renewable energy sources lacks strategy and planning, especially when considering California's climate. That is to say, the state's green initiatives to reduce its carbon footprint have actually caused imbalances that made its power grid reliant on gas-fired plants, essentially defeating its own purpose. Last week, after a historic heat wave pushed temperatures to hit triple digits, the state's power grid operators reminded residents to relieve pressure on the grid by charging their electric vehicles before the peak energy use times of the day. Remember to use major appliances to charge cars and devices before #FlexAlert begins at 6 p.m., the state's FlexAlert Twitter account wrote. However, demand was so high and hydropower capacity was so strained that there was no other alternative than to increase the use of fossil fuels. This situation really highlights the ways in which climate and energy and water are all very tightly linked, said Noah Diffenbaugh, a climate scientist at Stanford University. With meteorologists anticipating even hotter temperatures in the coming months, the state's increasing reliance on gas-fired plants is going against its goal of transitioning to carbon-free electricity. Diffenbaugh said, "Our systems and infrastructure have been designed and built in previous decades to work in our old climate. As the Earth gets warmer, triggering extreme conditions, those systems are getting stretched, unfortunately beyond their capacity," said Diffenbaugh. At this point, the crisis is getting so alarming that state energy officials have asked the California Independent System Operator, which runs most of the grid, to contract for additional power supply for July and August. Otherwise, it simply won't be able to meet demand during the evening when solar production decreases, according to a joint statement released last week from the grid, utility, and energy agencies. Even though they haven't specified how much more power will be needed, one can guess it will be a lot. California is using all available tools to increase electricity reliability this summer, the heads of the California Energy Commission, California Public Utilities Commission, and grid operators said, outlining unprecedented climate change-driven heat events which are occurring throughout the West in combination with drought conditions that reduce hydroelectric capacity. For some, however, these statements failed to assess that climate change isn't the only one to blame for this crisis. Experts with Zero Hedge argue that California officials could have seen this coming, as the same happened in August last year, and no preventative measures to avoid a repeat of the 2020 power outages were put in place. it's always someone else's fault that you could not properly budget even a few months in advance after keeping millions of people in the dark last year when California again blamed global warming. But if you know there is global warming and you suffer one nightmare summer in the dark because of it, can't you extrapolate at least a year into the future? In California, the answer is no, they wrote. So what we get once again is a summer of blackouts and tight energy supplies at a time when cooling systems are desperately needed. In the meantime, the government continues to take a number of steps that already epically have failed in the past. The latest of them was adding battery storage, which some might remember was a complete fiasco last summer to prevent blackouts as severe as those seen last August when the unprecedented demand took down the grid. But the big batteries that are being built to store solar power during the day and resupply the grid at night won't be available by August and September, the state's hottest months. Consequently, as California's green policies have led to the closure of several gas-burning plants over the past year, the electricity supply will remain tight at sunset as the production from solar generation fades around sundown. And knowing that the state's measures aren't enough to avoid catastrophic outages, just as seen in 2020, the state's grid operator is begging for more electricity. According to the letter, procuring additional capacity is a step taken to ensure electric reliability and preserve the public health and safety of all Californians, the official said. In the letter, they also cited delayed availability for some thermal power plants and revealed that some resources that were expected to be running during the hottest months have now been delayed. Notably, even Bloomberg, which doesn't hesitate when it comes to criticizing non-green sources of power, is admitting that California's problem is the state's aggressive push to cut its carbon emissions by recklessly shifting to renewable energy without properly planning or coming up with a plan B considering seasonal weather changes. In other words, while Californians are learning the hard way that the state's grid has become extremely vulnerable to critical disruptions, politicians simply cannot deny that California's green push has been a complete disaster, because now millions of people will be left in the dark during hot summer days and nights while countless other tragedies and casualties continue to emerge on the horizon.
And whatsoever you shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. If ye love me, keep my commandments.